Hi, I'm Danny Bachman. I am a retired but still active economist. My area of expertise is forecasting the economy. But of course, AI has become important in forecasting the economy. So I'm here to lead a discussion with two other experts on what AI might mean for the economy and why we might think or be a little more skeptical than some people seem to believe about AI's impact on the economy. So let me introduce my other two colleagues here. I'll start with Jake Schneider. Jake, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hey, viewers. My name is Jake Schneider. I am the founder of Atlas Analytics. We conduct macroeconomic forecasting from outer space using satellite imagery. Prior to that, I have a background at the U.S. Treasury Department as an analyst to Alan Greenspan, the World Bank, Bain& Co., and I have a graduate degree from Harvard and a graduate degree from Oxford.
And let's hear from Cliff Waldman, our other expert.
I'm Cliff Waldman. I'm an economist. I did my undergraduate and graduate studies in economics at Rutgers University. I am the founder and CEO of New World Economics, a company that focuses its needs primarily on the manufacturing sector, although we've been expanding beyond that. My two areas of expertise in economics and applied economic thinking are the manufacturing sector and small business and entrepreneurship.
Okay, thank you. Let me set the stage here. As an economic forecaster, but not an expert in I view AI as simply another technology, and my colleagues in economic forecasting do the same. Those of you who are not economic forecasters may be surprised to learn that economists have not actually changed our point of view about the long-term growth of the economy, despite all the hype around AI. And I can demonstrate that by telling you that the Congressional Budget Office, which is one of the most respected forecasters in the United States, assumes the same productivity growth now in its latest forecast as it did before generative AI was something that people talked about. There are several reasons for this. In the past, technology revolutions took years to take effect, years, decades uh, of work before they were accepted. So the impact was attenuated over a long period of time before we saw it in aggregate statistics. So anything that we're seeing now, high productivity growth in the last couple of quarters, which we did in fact see, may not reflect necessarily AI. There are all kinds of other things going on in the economy on a quarter to quarter or even a year to year basis. So it's not unreasonable to think that AI will have some impact on the economy over the long run, but that we've essentially already really taken it into account since we do predict productivity to grow at currently about 1.4%. With that background, let me turn things over to our two experts here, and I'll start with our first question. Um, is AI really a productivity engine, or is it all speculation? So let's start with Jake.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to weigh in on this. I think the best way to say it would be with an analogy. The year is not 2026. The year is 1994. And what was happening in 1994? We had an exciting new technology that was revolutionizing productivity. And famous economists, including Robert Solow, said you could see productivity everywhere, productivity gains from the internet everywhere, except for in the economic statistics. So if my analogy holds that it is 1994, not 2026, we have a long and new illustrious boom in motion that hasn't shown up ex ante. It will show up ex post in the productivity data, and that is due to the generative AI boom. We haven't seen its full impact yet. The innings are early. We are in the second or third inning, as we have argued at Atlas Analytics. It is 1994. It's not 2000 when we had the dot-com boom. And even after 2000, do you still use the internet? You do. And so we think this is a productivity boon and a productivity boom.
Cliff, do you want to weigh in?
Let's start off with the broad macroeconomic perspective. For the benefit of our viewers, you should be reminded, and I often refer to this as the most important equation in macroeconomics: the long-term sustainable growth of the U.S. economy or any other economy, which is what we really care for, because that tells us how much benefit it would give to our citizens, is equal to the growth of the labor force or labor hours usually, plus the growth of labor productivity. Demographics are working against the growth of the labor force in most of the Western world, not just the US. So productivity becomes all the more important. That's why we're focusing on it so hard. While it has a simple definition, output per hour of all workers, that's labor product. There's many different kinds of productivity, but that's the most important. That's labor productivity. It's complicated. It's hard to measure. I have published papers on productivity. I published one on manufacturing productivity, and often you need years of data to really say where a productivity is going. Now, is AI going to be a productivity generator? You have to sort of rein that in and say, hey, like any other new technology, AI is an enabler, but it's not going to enable by itself. It's one part of a team that works with human beings, and depending on how well that's done is how much we're going to see in terms of the productivity outcome. So don't just think of this as being a automatic economic phenomenon. It's also a management challenge. And it depends, the answer to that question depends on how AI, in conjunction with the labor force, is enabled and managed to create what companies are, the efficiencies and the growth that companies are hiring. We have to see. We don't know.
Jake, you mentioned Robert Solow. And so Robert Solow made that comment about computers in 1987. In our productivity research, economists generally agree that we got a bump up in productivity in 1995, and that bump up kind of went away in 1983. So the impact of computers were probably included in the underlying productivity as well, but the idea of a sort of special heightened productivity was actually a relatively short period of time. So I think we might want to take into account the possibility that, in fact, AI will look something like that. I don't think any of us would disagree that AI is going to make the world very different 20 years from now. The question is how that's going to happen and whether we'll really feel it in the economy. To use another historical example, when the British started building railroads, there was a huge financial boom. All kinds of things happened, but in the end, British railroads actually had a lot of trouble in the 19th century actually being profitable. It was hard for them to be profitable. So I'm going to ask you, what happens if something like that happens in AI, that whatever is going on in AI doesn't lead to this productivity and profits boom that we are expecting?
It's a great question. I can promise you at least one thing, it will happen. The vicissitudes of the market will necessitate that there will be overinvestment and then a contraction back towards the long-term growth rate of the economic productivity boon that we are seeing. But that doesn't mean that there is not an economic productivity boon. It just means that the market has overinvested relative to the current economic potential of what it is. And do we still use railroads? For freight, we do. They have become a natural embedded part of the longer term economic growth of developed and developing economies. Same with Solow talking about the computer. It has its, we're talking literally on a computer now. So the undulations of the market and the fact that there might be over speculation does not undo the credibility of the argument that I'm saying that there is still a productivity boon. To respond to Cliff's last point, we are seeing that productivity boom already, even if we're not measuring it in the statistics. And I mean it like this. Output per hour, as he mentioned, is the general is output per worker, output per hour are general ways of measuring productivity. How much goods are being produced by how much output is being produced by a set amount of input. And GDP was in Q2 was 3.8 closed book, and Q3 was 4.4 open book. Its second release. We're waiting for the final number. Q4 is shaping up to be an equally strong number. The Atlanta Fed has it at 4.2. We think it'll be around 5, but we'll release that next week at Atlas Analytics. Q1 is also looking very strong. So GDP is rising. What's happening to the denominator of that equation, the employee? That is having growth that's close to zero. People are talking about the labor market and how anemic it is. So if we have higher GDP in the numerator and a flat denominator, by definition, that is productivity. I'll pause there and wait for reaction.
Cliff?
Well, let's remember that all this is happening with a lot of other whirlwinds surrounding the AI story. We have what I think can legitimately be called a chaotic tariff story that is creating a lot of confusion, a lot of global confusion. We have we are still probably been seeing some post-COVID readjustments of the labor market. COVID changed the labor market in a lot of ways. So those two things have probably created some distortions of both the output and the employment statistics. Now, the question that you started with, Dan, what happens if AI disappoints? And here's what I think. Jake spoke about time moving forward with overinvestment, underinvestment. I'm going to talk about space. I think if AI disappoints, let's remember AI is not one technology. It's more complicated than just being a computer was a technology. AI is morphing into multiple technologies, and that can be used in different combinations in different ways. So if it disappoints in terms of productivity, it's not going to be an even disappointment. There are going to be winners and there are going to be losers, depending on industries, depending on the CEOs and on the management there. And that may really be the profound story here, because if that happens, and I think in the early stages it will, it's going to cause a sort of an industrial reorganization, probably the likes of which we haven't seen in quite a long time. So that's what I'm thinking is really going to be the story here. Winners and losers in the initial phase of this complex thing called an AI boom that's now one thing but several things. And those winners or losers are going to change the shape and the contours of industrial America, in the industrial world.
Thanks, Cliff. So we have these changes, and we can certainly argue about how important they are. But even the biggest technical changes in economic history tended to be associated with financial instability and bubbles. So here's a question for you: optimistic or pessimistic? Do we have a potential bubble on our hands right now? And if we don't, why do you think that current prices reflect fundamentals? And if we do, how do you think that might play out? And again, I'm going to go back to Jake because Jake mentioned this a little bit already.
Is AI, which is a multitude of technologies, as Cliff says, is AI a tulip mania like the bubble that existed in the Netherlands in the late Renaissance? Is it a bubble like the dot-com bubble, or is it fairly valued? That is the question here. And this is something that Atlas has done quite a bit of research on. We run analyses every week, which we distribute to our clients, that show where different ETF, exchange traded funds, an amalgamation of underlying securities is based on about 50 years of data compared to GDP, where it is based on its economic fundamentals. And basing it on economic fundamentals, GDP is a good basis, because if any equity, any stock, any speculative asset is too far removed from its economic basis, that is the definition of a bubble. And so based on our analyses, we actually conclude that the XLK, the spider sector spider for technology and different sectors related to technology, are actually a little overinflated, but not so much that we think that it is a speculative bubble that is at the precipice of returning to, proverbially, from, it's a satellite joke, returning to Earth from high orbit. So we actually believe we're in early innings. Again, like I said at the outset of this conversation, it's 1994. It is not 1999. It is not 2000. As long as the economic fundamentals, the engine that drives investing, the economic growth, continues to churn, and at high levels, we expect that this innovation boom, not speculative bubble, has legs to run.
Just let me follow up with one quick question. Do you think it's possible we could get overbuilding in areas like data centers? Because that's a typical phenomenon of a boom, and that would be reflective of a bubble as well.
I do think it's possible, but from everything that I'm reading, and I can't, so I do see through the satellites that data centers are being built. What I don't know is where is that compared to the fundamental value of the power output that's needed? And from everything I'm reading and from all the CEOs of OpenAI and Gronk and other major AI players, we need more power, not less. So the if anything, it seems like it's at a deficit. The expansion of the data centers is only to our benefit right now. Now, does that mean that they're just like the railroad mania, 19th and 20th century? Does that mean that there couldn't be over speculation, over investment in it? Definitely. But I don't think we're there yet. But I put that with a level of conviction of about 30 or 40%, because I truthfully don't know what the power outage that we need is and where we are relative to that. So I temper that with my conviction ratio.
Cliff, what are you thinking about bubbles?
Bubbles have always proven notoriously hard to judge. But along those lines, I just want to make one comment. There's one thing related to bubbles that worry me. Long term, not never mind short term, going through dealing with the perturbations that I mentioned before. But long term, no strength in the U.S. economy happens without the consumer. And I don't think AI is going to change that. The consumer has to be strong for the economy to be strong a long time. 70% of GDP is consumer spending. And that's where I'm a little afraid. The labor market is challenged, and AI is going to be more and more challenged. There seems to be a growing financial frigidity in American households. More and more, debt delinquencies, things like that. We have an aging population. We have, I mentioned demographics. We have, both in the United States and in much of the advanced world, we have declining declining fertility rates, and thus birth rates. So the consumer is challenged. And if in any way, so if the consumer is challenged, it's hard to believe that long-term growth won't be challenged. And if growth won't be challenged, we're investing massive amounts of money into AI based on its growth potential. But if the fundamentals of long-term growth are challenged by these things, I might worry about at least not a bubble that will show up this year or next year, but a bubble that eventually is going to it's going to turn into a problem, I think.
Okay, thank you. Um, I know that investors would love to know for 100% when a bubble occurs, because then you can bet against it. But no, we don't have the ability to do that as economists. So let me end this by asking each of you what would change your mind about investment, about the nature of AI. And Jake, you've been pretty optimistic, so I'm going to ask you what would make you decide that in fact you're being too optimistic. And Cliff, I would say, what would make you think that you should be more optimistic? So let's start with Jake.
Sure. Uh, I would say that Cliff's argument at the end of the last part was an extremely cogent argument of why I could be wrong. And so I want to pay homage to that and give him the credit he deserves. He's not saying, if I understood it correctly, that we're in a bubble that's imminent for popping. It's not bubblicious right now, next year, the year after that. What he was saying is in this K-shaped economy where the middle class is being hollowed out, if consumer spending, which he adroitly mentioned is about 70% of GDP, if consumer spending slows, the headline GDP number that I mentioned that is so strong will start to fall. And that does make me nervous. Not this year, maybe in the second half of 26. I don't know yet. I don't have visibility into the future. My crystal ball is not that clear. But in the beginning, I'm not worried about that. Now, the only thing, so I admit that what could make me wrong is Cliff's argument that the consumer who is hollowed out more by AI, and therefore we're not able to produce the economic engine that drives this country. Now, what makes me pause on my pause and makes me think that maybe that is not right is this, which is we just talked at the very beginning of the conversation, we talked about we talked about the productivity equation that it takes essentially, I'm saying the GDP is strong and we have fewer workers. So the multiple that is multiplying the number of workers times that number equals productivity, equals product equals output. The productivity number is getting higher. And so if that continues, then I feel good about it, especially if we find ways to integrate more people into the labor market. If we have that higher TFP, total factor productivity number, and we find ways to ingratiate these, siloed workers that are being made a little bit obsolescent by AI, we find a way to bring them back in, then we have the best of all worlds. We have a higher TFP, we have more workers working it, we're going to have even greater output. And so in conclusion, very succinctly, I hope I do think it's possible this will be a bubble in a little while if the K-shaped economy continues, but I'm hopeful that we will find ways with this higher TFP to put those people to work, which will be better for us in the long run.
Cliff, so what would make you optimistic?
One thing that I haven't discussed that may be an optimistic point to this whole story is the capacity of AI, much like the capacity of computers, much like the capacity of the internet, to create a surge in entrepreneurship and thus possibly new industries. I mean, a lot of these things, that I mentioned, and the latest being AI, is that they level the playing field for entrepreneurs. You can start a research firm and you don't necessarily have to spend money on research assistants. If you look at it, I've been looking at it negatively from the story of jobs, but if you look at it from the story of somebody starting a company for themselves,
Like me.
AI may make that much more possible. And if that becomes a surge and we start seeing new industries evolving, you won't have a bubble. What you'll have is a big return on investment, a return on growth. So that could be the element here that if it really emerges would make me a little more optimistic about the story.
And Dan, what do you
All
think?
right. I will admit I am on the concern side here, that I think that there is a tendency to overestimate what AI can do, particularly in the short run. And I have to tell you, when you mentioned the people that the places that you'd gone to look for information about demand, the sort of underlying demand for data centers, it reminded me that if during the housing bubble in the early 2000s, I could have gone to the National Association of Home Builders and they would have said, "Oh no, no bubble, not here." Uh,
Right.
so I'm not so sure that that's where I would necessarily go, but it's hard to know. Having lived through that bubble, I can tell you that we were arguing all the time over what the fundamental demand for housing was and whether we were overdoing it. I will end here by answering a question, Jake, that you posed to me, which is based on the way I think, which is the time series of productivity. How would I know when to say when AI has really broken out of being a normal world and really made a huge difference? And the answer is it would only be retrospective, and it would take some time to have enough data to be able to make that determination, which is not that satisfactory, I admit. And that's why conversations like this are so important.
Well, okay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right. And thank you for bringing me in.
All right. Bye-bye.